Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Yondan Latu. Freedom and democracy are two of the main demands being made by Occupy Central protesters on the city's streets over the past few weeks. They say they're a homegrown movement fighting for a better Hong Kong. But what if their good intentions are being used by external forces in a game of control played by the world's most powerful nations? It sounds like a great plot for a film, but this is real, and it seems to be happening right now.
There's a war going on around the world. It's unprecedented in size and scope, affecting millions, even billions of lives. Only many people are oblivious to it. It's a war fought on battlefields, in the media, in corporate boardrooms, and now on the streets of Hong Kong. To most people, Occupy Central is about issues that only affect locals. Yet it is a pivotal moment in the global fight for power and resources, and signals a dramatic turning point for the city.
I think it's a time, it's a very critical time for Hong Kong people to make a choice that whether they think democracy is important. And not only that, we ask also, are you willing to pay a price for that? That is, are you willing to give up some of your, maybe your freedom in order to achieve democracy for Hong Kong?
Now, people may not all vote, but people want the right to vote. You may not eat chicken every day, but why should I take away from you the right to eat chicken?
If the politicians and press are to be believed, the people have spoken and their message is clear. They want democracy and are prepared to fight for it.
I have said for quite some time that it seems the Beijing government is now regretting that they had actually said Hong Kong could have democratic election in 2017.
If somebody broke into your house and eat your food and drink your Coke in your fridge, you will not be very polite. It's not just a hamburger or Coke. It's our right, basic right, fundamental right.
But are freedom and democracy really what are being fought for? Are the protesters being used for other means? Could this be the dawn of a new era of unrest, unlike the city has ever seen?
We don't want a bloody revolution. I don't think Hong Kong people want to have turmoil like in Egypt or even in Thailand or Syria. No, people want peaceful, orderly protests.
In July, veteran politician Martin Lee and former Chief Secretary Anson Chan visited Britain, where they told the former colonial rulers that Hong Kong looked off course as far as the path to democracy agreed by Beijing and London in the 1980s was concerned.
It's already delayed. And yet, Beijing is now saying, okay, I give you the vote for the chief executive election, but I pick the candidates for you. You are allowed to marry. I pick the wife for you. Come on, this is the 21st century.
Earlier in the year, Lee and Chan went to the US to update Washington on Hong Kong's affairs. But the reception laid on for them at the airport when they returned wasn't what they were expecting. To their embarrassment, the people waiting there were yelling traitors. It appeared to take a few seconds to sink in. It was difficult for Lee to get his message across due to the noisy protesters.
Don't you see that Beijing is now deliberately generating opposition? Normally, okay, people demonstrate against the government for different reasons, but only in dictatorships or countries run by dictators that you find counter demonstration, demonstrating for the government.
Li and Chan's excursions didn't go down well with Beijing, which accused the US and Britain of meddling in its affairs. It wasn't the first time Li had made a trip to Washington, just the latest of many to brief American lawmakers and others.
Effectively, if Beijing wants any organization to be banned in Hong Kong, Beijing would press the requisite button in Beijing and the rest would follow. I think the Beijing leaders should be persuaded that the only possible way forward for Hong Kong is to bring about democracy.
Similar folks in Beijing have said, this is not the right thing for the U.S. to be doing, to have you come here and testify, and that it's a matter of internal affairs. How do you respond to that?
The mistrust between China and the US is mutual. Washington frequently raises red flags at Beijing's increased defense spending, which is a fraction of its own for a country that's much larger. The Chinese are concerned about the American pivot to Asia, the policy of shifting its forces east, away from the disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and surrounding China. President Barack Obama has boosted bases in Japan and renewed Washington's vow to protect the country. He's made a new deal to station troops in the Philippines and even forged military ties with former arch-enemy Vietnam.
It is my pleasure to welcome President Thong Tan Sang to the White House. We discussed the need for continued efforts to resolve peacefully maritime issues that have surfaced in the South China Sea.
Now he's thinking about planting missile systems in South Korea.
In the era of George Bush, they built up two immediate react contingents. So one is in Middle East, one is in Europe. So, but now it's too much. So they built only 1.5. So the main one should stay in Asia. That's why now they come back to Asia. That's why the conflict between Japan and the Sino-Japanese relationship turned very tight.
The US wants to maintain its status as the world's sole superpower. China's rapid development is seen as a threat by hawks patrolling Washington's corridors of power. Similar moves are being made against Russia, with waves of anti-Moscow propaganda in the Western media and plans to put missile bases in Poland. Currently, the West is blaming Russia for the civil war in Ukraine, which began after protesters overthrew the government in late February. The US State Department has been funding revolutionary movements in Ukraine for years, so they can oust anyone who comes into power it doesn't like. It's the second time in 10 years.
The United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
2 days earlier, Victoria Nuland was spotted handing out bread and cookies to protesters and riot police in Kiev.
We're here from America. Would you like some bread? Please take something. Please.
She was later caught on tape insulting Europe during a phone conversation in which she discussed who among the protest leaders should run the new government after the imminent US-backed revolution. Support for regime change wasn't limited to Obama's administration.
I'm proud of the people of Ukraine and their steadfast efforts for democracy for their country.
Opposition Republican Senator John McCain made several trips to Kiev and openly called for the overthrow of democratically elected pro-Moscow President Viktor Yanukovych.
Have we seen American flag down there anywhere?
There'll be one somewhere.
The US State Department also had a hand in the protests in Tunisia, Egypt and Libya, funding and training the activists who ousted their leaders in the so-called Arab Spring.
Yeah, they print the money in Wall Street in order to topple those governments. It's not entirely right. You're entirely right. I don't support the US policy. I don't think they're fond of democracy.
Sowing the seeds of revolution are organisations like the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created in 1983 and is funded by the State Department. It spent millions of dollars training thousands of activists from all over the world to evade authorities, organise protests and more. They attend training camps and are given access to technologies that can bypass government firewalls and send secure text and voice messages. In 1991, one of the NED's founders said, "A lot of what we do was done 25 years ago covertly by the CIA." Leaders of Egyptian student group, the April 6 Youth Movement, who organised the mass protests that ousted ruler for 4 decades, Hosni Mubarak, told the US media that without NED help and encouragement, they probably couldn't have done it. The policies that were supposed to bring freedom and democracy to Egypt, Ukraine and Libya have instead created disaster areas, ravaged by civil unrest and political power struggles. What is far more plausible is that these have deliberately been taken out of the global game of power and control. Is it possible that as the US moves its pieces surrounding China, the many NED-funded groups operating within its borders are planning to bring down the country from the inside? And could Hong Kong be playing an unwitting role?
Are you suggesting that the Hong Kong demonstrations were instigated by the US government?
More on that after the break. In the battle for global power and control, the media plays an important role in smearing adversaries and stirring up trouble. In the same way the mainland press peddles propaganda to its people, the likes of CNN and the BBC have conditioned generations in the West into treating anything China does with suspicion. Opportunities to bash Beijing are rarely missed. The defection of blind mainland activist Chen Guangcheng was portrayed as a victory for US diplomacy and human rights. But in reality, it was neither. He was jailed in 2006 after trying to sue authorities in Shandong province for strictly enforcing the one-child policy. He was freed in 2010, but put under house arrest only to somehow escape and seek asylum at the US Embassy in Beijing in 2012. It was an international incident, as then US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was visiting China at the time.
This is not just about well-known activists. It's about the human rights and aspirations of more than 1 billion people here in China and billions more around the world. And it's about the future of this great nation and all nations.
China Aid, a charity sponsored by Clinton's State Department through the National Endowment for Democracy, promoted Chen's cause around the world.
Yeah, after Chen Guangcheng walked out of his home, and he was offered to come abroad for safety protection, but he was very reluctant to do so because he wants to, what he said is to fight to the end for the freedom and the basic rights.
I want to meet with the Secretary Clinton.
A month later, Chen, his wife and 2 children were granted US visas so he could go to New York to work at a university. The mainstream media coverage fizzled out soon after the Chens touched down in America, free at last. The fate of the women subjected to the forced abortions that originally outraged Chen hasn't been so widely reported. Nor has the fact that the abortions were paid for by the United Nations as part of its population program. Few media outlets pointed out that President George Bush blocked US payments to the fund in 2002 because of pressure from pro-lifers. But Barack Obama resumed the flow of money in 2009 as he believed the population program would improve the health of women and children. Chen, who won the NED's Democracy Award in 2008 for his hard work, has effectively been gagged on the issue of abortion. He's turned his attention to other pressing mainland matters. Recently, he warned that a Ukraine-style uprising could happen in China any day now. Perhaps through his ties at the NED, which funds dozens of groups across China, he knows something we don't. Is it possible the mainland is ripe for another revolution, coordinated by the NED's vast network of activists, just as it has done in Ukraine and elsewhere, with devastating results?
Even if they fund groups in China, now if it is illegal, they should be prosecuted. If it is legal, why are you asking questions?
Martin Lee was presented the NED's Democracy Award in 1997 and still has a very close relationship with the organisation. When we asked him about his links to the NED and his opinion of Chen's prediction, he refused to answer.
You are asking me what other people said as being possible reasons for certain things being done by certain groups in the States. I mean,
but this is a group that you have strong ties to.
In Hong Kong, yes. But I don't have ties with the NED in the operations outside Hong Kong. That seems to be the nut of your questions. And it's totally irrelevant to our discussion about Hong Kong's democracy.
But others were willing to talk about it.
That's possible, as we know that there's a lot of social unrest in China. There are many protests in China every day, but just it may not be widely reported. And I think that's not from, it's from official data provided by the Chinese government itself.
Well, I don't really care about what the U.S. government tried to do in China. In the end of the day, U.S. as a biggest U.S. administration as the biggest empire on this earth, of course, they try to influence different part of the world. It's crystal clear. They have budget for the CIA. It's not any news.
China has spent so much time in maintaining social stability. They have used more energy, more money on maintaining stability than on national defense.
Luo Yuk-kai runs the Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor, one of the local organisations that are funded by the NED, receiving millions of dollars over the past 15 years. Despite the large amount of cash involved, he claims he didn't know the NED was run by the US government.
No. We have some funding from the National Endowment Democracy.
How can you consider yourself an NGO when you get money from the US government? Civic Exchange, a think tank founded by Green Queen turned government minister Christine Low, also received hundreds of thousands of dollars from the NED. No one there would agree to be interviewed, but they did answer our questions. They also denied receiving money from the US government, insisting the NED relied on private donations. Are these organisations aware of exactly where their funding comes from?
The National Endowment Democracy funding requires some kind of say year-end report of what we have done. Okay, we would just say what we have done there. Okay, it's not reporting to the U.S. government. Okay, but it's important to know that people who actually contribute their money and time here, these volunteers care about Hong Kong issues.
Law insists it's unlikely foreign-funded groups on the mainland are capable of bringing down the government.
And actually, Chinese authority, so-called, had learned from the Soviet Union's experience in trying to nip the butts, okay, before it grow up. So they try to make sure that there's any initiative from the people, any organized, especially organized one, right, which would challenge the authority of the governance, okay, they would stop them. Okay.
It's ironic that strategy is identical to what America appears to be doing to China to maintain its status as the world's only superpower. As we've seen in the rest of the world, supposedly pro-democracy activities have divided nations and destroyed economies. Despite Beijing's efforts to filter out word of social unrest and civil disobedience in Hong Kong, the news will have repercussions on the mainland, although it may not be immediate. Is this the ultimate aim of Washington's input in Hong Kong, destabilizing China?
You've got to make it relevant.
But of course it's relevant. Because
how? In what way?
Well,
unless you're suggesting the US government is funding these demonstrations in Hong Kong, or in any other way encouraging it.
I'm not just specifically.
And if you are not, then what is the relevance?
I think that our pro-democratic friends are not as innocent as to believe it.
They try to, all the foreign governments might have their own interests, and what they say, or even the research they fund, all this, is just a way to shape the public opinion of Hong Kong people.
Okay, if we contribute to the democratization of Hong Kong, and this is also in the interest of the U.S. government, then I must congratulate the Hong Kong public that we have support not only ourselves, but other part of the world.
Do not rely on foreign power to get what we wanted, because if they can give us that, they can take it away at will.
Whether most Hong Kongers want or even care about democracy is no longer an issue. What the Occupy protests have done is force people to pick sides and take their fight onto the streets. This could just be the beginning of an era of not only protests, but of political and ideological violence.
I didn't say that. It's a heaven out there.
No, I'm not saying that.
So, if the American people are sick and tired of the parliamentary democracy of USA, they will revolt one day. They will say no. They will say enough is enough. There will be riot.
With the Occupy and student leaders vowing to continue their action, there are growing demands to know who is keeping them going. Pro-government lawmakers are calling for a formal investigation into the civil disobedience movement, and former Security Secretary Regina Ip, now an influential Beijing loyalist in LegCo, wants it to get to the bottom of allegations that American interests are funding the campaign. Former LegCo President Rita Fan shares similar concerns, reflecting the thinking in Beijing.
一路以嚟，即係國際上亦都有好多有啲人士咧嚇，對於中國能夠經濟發展而國家唔亂咧，其實佢哋都係希望咧中國嘅發展唔好咁快嘅。因此，利用香港作為一個缺口嚟到希望影響中國嘅發展咧，亦都唔係奇怪嘅。
Fan believes foreign forces are pulling the strings of the protest leaders and questioning how there seems to be an endless supply of essential goods and food, doubting that it's all been donated by concerned locals. For now at least, the mostly young protesters out in the streets are not asking such questions. Any suggestion that they're being manipulated in a much bigger and more cynical political game by foreign interests is instantly dismissed or ridiculed as a conspiracy theory.
That's all for this edition of Inside Story. If you have any comments or suggestions, email us at insidestory@atv.com.hk. We'd like to hear from you. I'm Yondan Latu. Thanks for watching.